as a science communicator, and the way that I'm doing that is especially through painting and art, but there's a few other things I'm doing with combining science and art that I want to share with you as well. So I do science communication through my art, and this is one example. This is a crop of one of my paintings in the background. And so this painting is showing salmon swimming across the page, and beneath the salmon, that jagged line is a graph, a line graph, and that graph is showing their population over time, so how it's increased and decreased over the years. And so my goal was to use my painting of the fish, my painting of the water, all the patterns I included to help tell the story of this population change and just bring that graph to life a little bit more. And so before going into more of this work, which is what I have been doing for the last 5 years, I'm gonna first go into a little bit about how I got started with this and a little bit about my science background too. So I'm working as an artist and a science communicator. The photo on the left is my current studio space. Right now, I just have a studio in my home in Westbrook, but I'm hoping to have a studio space outside of my home in the next year as well. And then in the photo on the right, I'm making a painting of one of the big mountains in northwestern Washington state called Mount Baker. And I work out there to do research on the glaciers in front of me. So all of that, the snow and ice covering the mountains. And this photo was taken in August, which is why I'm wearing shorts and there's wildflowers and things around me. And then I have an earth and climate science background as well. I did a double major for my undergrad in studio art and earth science. And then I stayed on to do my master's in earth and climate science. And I really loved that getting to be in the natural sciences allowed me to go travel and get to ask questions about our world and how it changes over time. And so in the top left, I'm in New Zealand. I was taking a sample of that top surface of that boulder to figure out when ice left that boulder there in the past. In the top right, I'm in the Falkland Islands, and I'm measuring this deposit of soil next to me. In the bottom left, I'm in Antarctica, where I did my Master's of Science research. And that was essentially just studying how sensitive the ice sheet is to warming. And of course, that's my research, which is one little piece in that puzzle. It's not solving that question. And in the bottom right, I am working on the mountain glaciers in Washington, which I'll be talking about a little bit. So I've been working in Washington State for 12 years. So every single August, I work with a research team called the North Cascade Glacier Climate Project. And it's a project that my dad started. He's a scientist and specifically a glaciologist. And so that just means he studies glaciers. And so I join him as a field assistant every August. And we're basically studying glaciers like the one behind me, where a lot of the big mountains in places like Washington, Oregon, Alaska, Canada have these glaciers covering them. And I think like in Washington alone, there are I think over 700 glaciers. This is not like an uncommon thing. And this ice can be hundreds of feet thick. And I think the most important, or one of the most important things about it in terms of people, is that during the summer season, when all the snow and ice is melting and going into streams, it feeds into a lot of the water systems and the reservoirs for drinking water. They use a lot of hydropower out there. And of course, just on an ecosystem level, for providing water for salmon, for providing like the certain climate for species. And so what I do with the project is study year to year just how much these glaciers are changing. And so we just take measurements of how the snow was that past winter. We take measurements of how much the glacier retreated and got smaller and things like that for a few weeks. Another example of kind of climate change I experienced besides the glaciers changing has been a lot of forest fire activity. And I know it's something in other parts of the world as well, but it's been happening so much in the Western United States and Western Canada. And this is a photo of a mountain lake near one of the glaciers where we work. This lake is actually fed by the glaciers there in the opposite direction of this photo. And this has become really common where from one day to the next, like in these photos, for if the wind direction shifts and there are bad fires going on somewhere in the area, even if it's 100 miles away, that smoke is going to really fill the air. And it's difficult for us because we're working outside all day, we're camping and backpacking. And so, there's not really an escape. And this isn't something that I had experienced until 2015. And ever since then, it's like every year, it's just the new kind of normal. And one thing to note also is there are some schools, at least in the Pacific Northwest, I don't know about in places like Colorado and things, but there's some schools in like Oregon and Washington that, have to have smoke days sometimes for the kids if air quality is too poor. And so then this is a photo of me this past August in 2020. We were still able to go out and do the field season. It was in question for a little bit, but behind me is the very end of one of the mountain glaciers that we work on. And so the lowest elevation kind of point where the glacier ends, it's called its terminus. And that just means the end. And it does extend above the horizon for a few miles. So it's a pretty big glacier. You can only see a little piece of it. And I am standing where that glacier used to end when I first started working there 12 years before. And so hundreds of feet of retreat, but you can also imagine it's not just the distance, it's the kind of volume or thickness of ice that is needed to melt for it to pull back that far. Because it would probably take me, I don't know, like 10 minutes to get up to where the ice is now. It's not like a short walk. And it's even more powerful to see where the glacier used to end when my dad first started working here 35 years before. And so I just think that landscapes like this, I guess just glacial landscapes, I've always loved. And I grew up in Massachusetts and have been living in Maine for a decade. And so when I get to go out to places like this, it feels like so special because it's not the landscape around me. And I think they're so beautiful. And, I know they're going to change, but there's always that part of me that wishes they weren't. However, I think there's positives, there's things that you can embrace, like, more maybe wildflowers on the hills and things like that. And certainly like within my lifetime and beyond, this mountain is not going to be bare of glaciers. They're going to get smaller, but they'll still be there. So as a scientist, I have gotten to develop just those scientific practices, like getting to go to places like Washington and ask questions about the way that the glaciers are changing, the water levels are changing, and try to find answers to some of those questions. I've gotten to gain that background in the way that our Earth and climate system works. And I think it's something that I wish was taught just in public schools for people to have a better understanding of climate change. And I've also gotten as a scientist to learn about what are the ways that scientists tend to communicate their work. That's often through talks, through posters at conferences, and then of course through publications of their data. And I think those are all great ways, but sometimes there are those missing connections, I think, with the public or with general audiences who you don't have a background in what they're doing. And that applies to someone like me who's in science, but only has one specialty as well. So as an artist, I think some things I've been focusing on are developing that kind of creative narrative skill set in your work. Besides kind of the technical art background is also just, how to go about incorporating some sort of complex topic into my art, and then learning about how art can communicate. And so for me, that's painting. So I'm focusing more on visual, but through the composition, through the type of emotion that you try to incorporate. And I think some of these things can be applied to science as well, but I haven't developed them as strongly in science. So in combining art and science, my goals are to pair science information with visuals and have those visuals give more of that emotional view of climate change data that can perhaps better communicate with some people. So yeah, just sharing environmental stories that that people can feel, I guess. So a lot of my paintings that combined art and science have always been or were initially making paintings of things that I got to see when I was out doing research. So this is a view on one of those mountain glaciers in Washington, and the ice that I painted that's in front of or behind the painting is those areas are called ice falls. It's like all broken up like big blocks of ice, like a cliff of ice. And that just happens when the glacier is flowing over like a cliff in the bedrock underneath it. So the ice is having to flow over this cliff, and it's all breaking up and forming its own cliff kind of. And so I was painting this landscape, and when I started the painting, it had been that kind of amazingly blue sky you can get like up in the mountains, and then by the time I was done, it was cloudy. And so just kind of capturing this landscape and what was in front of me. And so I do a lot of these, and then paintings like this too that I'll usually do when I get home based on photos, so I can capture more of the research being done. So the painting on the left is showing 3 figures, and the one in red is standing on snow on a glacier, and he's taking a core, but he's not taking a core down of the ice. He's only doing of the snow that's atop of the ice. And basically he's able to just look at that past winter and what happened with, snowstorm events that past winter. How does the snow look basically? And just to be clear, also for glaciers, their snowfall accumulates and it sits on top of the glacial ice, and slowly over time the snow compacts to form that ice. And then the painting on the right is showing a woman scientist standing on just bare glacial ice, no snow on it. So that'd be lower on the glacier when all of the snow from the past winter has melted and now the ice is starting to melt. And she is standing in front of this big crack, combine the words crack in the glacier. So those are called crevasses. And she is basically measuring the depth of that crevasse. And she has this tool. She can wind down kind of like this wire with a heavy dropper at the end, so she knows when it gets to the bottom, and measure ice thickness basically. So what I'm doing now with my work is again making paintings that incorporate data and graphs as a way to combine art and science and tell these stories. And so the painting on the right is the first painting that I made, where I came up with this idea of putting graphs into my work. And so this painting is supposed to be part of a mountain glacier, kind of like the ice fall that I showed you. My version of it, of course, kind of using, colors and patterns that I choose. And it was inspired by that work in Washington and seeing the glaciers retreating and wanting to communicate that with my classmates back in Maine, because when I created this, I was still a college student. And so the graph I used is on the left, and first, the x-axis is just showing time, 1984 to 2014, so 30 years of change. And then on the y-axis, it says annual mass balance. And so that's just the budget of a glacier, how much snow it gains in the winter versus how much snow melts away and it loses in the summer. And so that budget is going to be negative when it's melting more than it's gaining snow. And so that's what that dark blue graph line is showing, that sharp decrease in the glacier mass. And I should have said this before, but this is the research from the project that my dad begins that I help out with in Washington. And so I used that graph as the kind of top surface or kind of like profile side view of the glacier where it's steep. And I tried to incorporate its beauty and also kind of show how at the bottom it's more kind of gray, as like rock and debris is kind of melting out as it gets thinner. So I basically just wanted to show people how sharply this decline was in glacial mass with this painting. And now I've gone on to do a lot more graph paintings. So for this painting, I wanted to kind of talk about how my process works in these. And so first, I choose a topic for my painting, and that can come from a lot of directions. It can be an image I see, it can be something in the news or social media, something I hear about. It doesn't have to be research. It's usually not research that I've been involved with. It could be topic from anywhere in the world. But it's a story I want to communicate in my art. And The example on the left, the topic is warming in the ocean, and I was specifically focusing on the Gulf of Maine for this painting. So my second step, once I had the idea of to do ocean warming, was finding data, which can definitely be a tough part of my process. It's not just one place you can go. You can find data on places like NASA's website or other big science websites. You can find it in research papers that scientists put out. But sometimes it takes some digging, and another step I often take is to reach out to someone who's an expert in the topic I'm looking into, or the person whose data I'm going to use. And so the graph that I included in the painting on the left is showing temperature change in the Gulf of Maine over the last 15 years and how it goes up and down, but the overall trend is that it's increasing. And the biggest concern, I think, with that is not necessarily, it's partly the increasing temperature, but I think it's more that there's a lot more variability in temperature. And so the background trend is warming. We have all these really quick ups and downs in temperature. And I think those are not the regular cycles that used to occur. And it's probably difficult for species to adapt to. And so my third step, once I have my data and my topic, is to figure out how I'm going to tell the story about the data. And so just kind of imagining that this is just a blank graph right now, what elements am I going to include in a piece of art to bring that story to life? Because there's a lot of different ways I could focus on it. I could have made it more about humans and the impact on us, whether good or bad. I could have made it about the fishing industry more, or about how warm oceans cause more extreme weather. But I kind of made it, in my opinion, probably like the simplest kind of focus, which is how it's going to affect the species that live in it. They live in the ocean. And so I wanted to include kind of like the whole water column of some different examples of species down to the bottom. And so the fish are cod, and as they swim across the painting, they're kind of starting to disappear because they've also been really overfished as another kind of stressor on them. I included shrimp, and on the bottom there's lobster, and in the sand there's also soft shell clams. And so all these species, this is their their habitat. They can, I suppose, maybe go further north if it gets too warm, but they, there isn't like another ocean, obviously. So the last element I did include was the fishing boat, just to kind of bring in the human element to the story as we're causing this warming. And we also have that role to play, as a coastal state, with kind of management if these species are being stressed also by warming and by chemistry changes to the water. And so, yeah, that was the focus. And there's always so many pieces to the stories in my painting, and I don't expect the viewer to necessarily see all of them, but I always include a caption with a brief paragraph about what my data is, and like kind of just a few sentences about what I'm trying to convey, so that people who do want to learn about it, they can. But I always do have kind of a bunch of different storylines within my work. So to start any of my paintings, this is where I start, and these were the sketches I made when I was trying to think about what to do for this painting. And so I start really simple, and this is something that I was taught, I can at least remember in high school art class, and was really encouraged to do through college as well. And they've always been called thumbnail sketches, but they're often just called that because they're small, they're a couple inches or whatever you want, and you're just supposed to use it to get ideas down on the page, kind of like the same thing if you're like writing a paper or you're trying to like outline it first, and what do I even want to write about? And same with art, you sometimes hear that inspiration just comes to you, and that can happen now and then, but that's not, you have to work towards creativity and new ideas. And so this is getting ideas down, and once you get your brain working, you think of so many more things that you wouldn't have. And so I use this to decide my final kind of approximate idea for my painting. And then I can make a final detailed sketch. And so that's what's in the left here, is that final detailed sketch I do in pencil, so I can erase it as I go. I transfer my graph onto it. There's different ways to do that. I can trace it, or like cut a piece of paper and trace it, or do tracing paper, things like that. And I choose to paint just right on top of my pencil and kind of just work in layers and build up detail as different layers dry. And this is in watercolor, and a lot of my work is in watercolor because it's just the medium that I feel like I found my voice the most with as an artist and have the most practice with. So I really do all sorts of painting and printmaking, and I've drawing and things, but my favorite is just watercolor. So most of these works are done with that. Oh, I guess that was it for that painting. And then just one more I wanted to show you guys was the painting I did for the cover of Time magazine this past July 2020. So that was obviously a huge opportunity for me as an early career artist, and on showing me kind of the, I guess, view, some people's view of the importance of communicating climate change and climate change art specifically. And so I made this painting on the left specifically for Time. It was up to me, you know, what I created, but the issue was going to be was entirely about climate change. And so I wanted to be about global climate change, not, you know, United States focused. And so I wanted to also have a kind of mix of messages. And so I have 5 different graph lines in this painting, and I have combined graph lines before, but this was the most. And so starting from the bottom, like that dark blue layer, that is showing sea level rise from 1880 to present. And I believe there's been about, I think, 8 inches of sea level rise, and a lot more is predicted just for the next, like, you know, 50 to 100 years than that. The light blue is showing total land ice loss. And by land ice, I mean both the mountain glaciers, like, you know, and that was showing you in Washington and places like that, but then also the 2 ice sheets that we have, the Antarctic ice sheet and the Greenland ice sheet. And so the total ice that's been lost from those from 1960 to present. The green, the trees are showing the global increasing use of renewable energy over time from 1960 to present. And I hope that's something that really starts to increase, because I'm really happy to see this increase, but it really needs to be better. And then in yellow is the global temperature change over from 1880 to present. And then the gray is showing the increasing use of carbon dioxide from 1880 to present as well. And Time, one thing that Time did say they were interested in that I agreed with was in showing how there was that slight little kind of decrease in CO2 use last year. I imagine largely due to like decrease in transportation. I'm sure there were some other reasons as well. And they also, after that little decrease, they wanted me to have a little dashed line showing how maybe it can continue to decrease. And my thought was that, you know, I expect that our CO2 use will go up again this year, but I think it is a good example of how, like, if we were to globally act, we could really quickly make a difference in, you know, what we're putting out into the atmosphere. And so I kind of use these graphs to make kind of this abstract, almost kind of pattern landscape, to just help bring the data to life. And then Time made the simple animation just to show first the graphs by themselves, and then how my painting was supposed to, again, like, tell those stories. And I know my work is going to, I don't expect it to be the right thing for everyone to learn or to connect with. I just want it to be, you know, for some people, the thing. So then lastly, I just wanted to share what I am working on right now for paintings. Something I'm starting to do is work directly with science teams in a collaboration. And so by that, I mean, there's a research group that has to get funding to do their research. They write a big grant, and I can be on that grant and kind of paid like a commission where I'm getting paid to do art that communicates their research. And so it's a direct collaboration. And so that's something that I'm doing with one research group right now. And that research group studies paleo ecology. So basically just how, you know, plants and plant systems and things have changed in the past. And that's especially important for just understanding how, plants are going to have to adapt now as the climate warms. And so I tried to tell a story with paintings for them. And so I'm going to be making 5 paintings and I'm done with 4 of them. So on the left there is the first painting that I made for this group. And it shows 2 women scientists and they're standing on a frozen lake in Norway. That's where some of the research is based. They're standing on a frozen lake in Norway with like mountains behind them. And you can see underneath the water and that long like line that goes down through the water is for them to be able to core the sediment, that little strip of sediment at the very bottom of the lake. And so that's one thing that scientists do rather than having to go on a boat where it's like the boat is moving, is they'll go on a frozen lake to take cores of the bottoms of lakes. And then the second painting is just providing kind of another view of that. And I should have said that neither one of these have data in them, not all my work does. So the second painting is showing someone taking a core again, but now they're standing on a bog. And again, you can kind of see this cross section down underneath their feet in the soil. So you can see what they're coring and you can see all these layers. And you can see the layers are first kind of more brown, like a lot of organic material from, plants that are decomposing. And then the layers get more gray, which is what happens when there's less plant material. And that means that that's when ice covered this area. So then on the left is my third painting in the series. And that is now showing what's in the layers that they cored. Why are they taking these cores and what are they finding in them? And so all of those funky shapes in the core layers are supposed to be seeds and pollen that are preserved in the sediment over time. So it'd be ancient because they're preserved from plants that used to be alive. And so they can find out about what used to live in these areas in the past and how that's changed over time. And so then the fourth painting is a map, which I hadn't done before, a map of Scandinavia. And I should have said before, but the primary type of cedar pollen that they were looking for was from the Norway spruce, because they wanted to know how Norway spruce adapts to climate change. And basically, this map on the right is showing where cores were taken. And so those little like kind of dots on the map, and those are supposed to be the pollen grains of Norway spruce as data points. And so those data points, again, are marking where the cores were taken. And they're dating the pollen from those Norway spruce and finding out when they were growing there. And so the colors on their map are showing the time frame when Norway spruce first kind of populated these regions after the last ice age. And so yellow is like the bright yellow is modern, and then going back to darker yellow, and then green is going back further in time to the blue, and the darkest blue is about 10,000 years ago. And so looking at that like dark blue kind of the dark blue blobs, I guess, 10,000 years ago, it's where Norway spruce were. They couldn't grow further north because ice was covering the land. And as that ice pulled back and we got to the climate we have today, the Norway spruce was able to spread all the way around that kind of like peninsula of Scandinavia and spread. I hope that made sense. And not all of the work that I do in collaboration with scientists will be quite this, in my opinion, like it's a little dense. Some of it will be more like kind of clear topics, like some of the other work I was showing, but I have fun doing a mix of things like this. And the scientists will send me photos of their fieldwork to help inspire my work. So one thing I didn't say is whenever I'm making these paintings, I kind of make these collages on my computer of kind of reference images, inspiration images that, help me think about how I want to paint it and the colors to use and things like that. And so these were photos of this research group going and taking cores and looking at these these Norway spruce trees and where they are now. And then these were photos or images they sent me from the microscope of the ancient pollen and seeds that they find in these cores. And so I was using these as my references for my painting. And then on the right there was this kind of little sketch and descriptor that one of the scientists sent me about when I was trying to decide how to make my painting about what's in a core. So I have just wanted to share my view of what I'm doing, because I think it's so important that for any kind of important topic, we find different ways to share it. And so on the top left, I have just the screenshot of the website for that project I work with in Washington. And on that, you can access all sorts of information. To the right of that, we always take photographs of our fieldwork to, for us, for memory, of course, but to share with other people and share those stories. To the top right is one of my landscape paintings, again, just kind of showing fieldwork. And the bottom left is one of the science papers from the project in Washington. And so that's going to be more dense, kind of really descriptive science writing. Again, to the right of that is the data or the graph from the project, and then my data art to communicate that graph and research. And so there's just all these different ways that we can, share kind of the same topic. And I think that is really helpful for me to think about as someone who's interdisciplinary. And then lastly, I just wanted to share about some of the student outreach that I do associated with this. And so I do a lot of classroom kind of presentations. And then if teachers are interested and have the time in their curriculum, then I often will do data art projects with students. And so it depends on, I've done that like K through 12. And so it depends on the age, if, I provide or the teacher provides a few choices of graphs for students. And those graphs could be, even a local topic that maybe the students experience, or some teachers will help the students find their own graphs and guide them in doing that, so they can choose a topic that they care about. And so then I have a bunch of examples here of student data art, and I've always been really impressed with the stories that they tell and are able to communicate. I do wish, and something I think about my own work too, is I do wish that there was a few more stories that were positive, because there's a lot of positive environmental actions and changes that are happening. And I didn't share that quite as much in my work, but that's something I've been starting to include over the last last few years, are some messages of hope and action. And then here's a few more examples of student data art that I was really blown away with. I think this was a middle school class in California, and I was actually just really impressed with their art ability too. And I'm working kind of more intensely with some schools right now. Like one school I'm just starting a data art lesson with this week is Yarmouth Middle School, and so I'm looking forward to seeing what those students create. And I also work with organizations to promote my work, of course, and also to just get, again, this kind of climate change communication in different forms, like skis and book and magazine covers and things. And so some of that are opportunities that come to me. Some of them are opportunities that I seek out. And I think the Time cover really taught me that you can always try for something, and you might not hear back, it might not happen. And that's happened to me plenty, but it's worth it to try. And I would have never thought to try to have a cover for them. So my things I wanted to share are just that first, I think the different media can really communicate different types of complexities. And so I've learned that in my science and my art and by seeing other examples from other people. So it's been important for me to understand what the boundaries are of certain media. And those boundaries are definitely not, set or anything, but, what audiences are different forms best intended for, and what can I do to combine media to reach even broader audiences. And so two, I think that art is one of those really powerful ways to connect with people about important topics. And so I'm doing that with climate change, but that applies to so many things. And I think that's a way that art has been used to represent important things in our culture always. I just think that art can really tell stories in emotional ways, and I can use it to, again, kind of bring these graphs to life and make climate change feel real, even if it's a climate change that someone hasn't experienced. And I hope to also connect it with encouraging people to take action in the future. And again, I just hope that, for some people, my art is a good way to communicate and get them to think and feel what these things really mean. Thank you very much for listening, everyone. I look forward to chatting with you now and answer any questions you might have.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic. I love seeing all your pieces. And I will note that I follow Jill on Instagram, and she has some great pieces. She shows like her art as she's going along. So if you're on Instagram, I encourage you to follow her. But now for any questions folks have, you can either just raise your hand and say them out loud since we're not a huge group, or put them in the chat, whichever you prefer. It looks like Lorraine, you have a raising your hand.
Yeah, I can put my face, there's a face. Thank you so much. That was so wonderful. And I just love what you're doing. And the question that I have is, I'm a scientist and also really appreciate the arts. So is about how you've thought about time, because they're graphs, they involve time. And so you talked about having captions, and sometimes I could see that you sort of included visual clues to the time, like with the cores in Scandinavia. But I just was interested to hear about, how you've thought through portraying these graphs without a timeline, and like in particular, I'm thinking of the ocean warming one with the cod and the lobster and everything. Anyway, that's my question. Time.
Yeah, I think it's tricky, and there's this like line, I think, as an artist, and I have included axes like once or twice, but I think that is kind of like the purpose of the graphs that exist. And so it's like, how do I kind of make it, I guess I'm making kind of fine art. And so how do I separate that a little bit from, not have it be an infographic and not have it be the data exactly. And so I think my main goal is for people to pay attention to the trend. Just like the graph, like increasing or decreasing. But I think knowing the time frame is really obviously a big part of it. And yes, like I had mentioned, you said, like, I'll include the time frame in the caption. I know that not everyone's going to read those captions, but they're there if people want to. I think otherwise people might not even, without even like engaging with my work more, reading the caption, I don't even think that everyone would notice the graphs, because that's a response that I've gotten, which is interesting to think about. And yeah, I think showing time in another way is hard. Like, I tried to show it kind of conceptually with like in that main warming one with the fish, the thought that they're like disappearing, but otherwise there's not really, I think, like a strict way that I've done that. And like one kind of thing that I have seen some artists do is show kind of a time lapse with art, where it's like, oh, you have the glacier now and then now and then now. But I think that is not quite what I'm looking to do in my work, but I think that's a more clear visual of time. But yeah, it's a good question to think about and consider, because a lot of times I'm constrained by the graph that I find too, in the timeline of that graph. Like, sometimes I'd like to show more than I can because the data doesn't exist or something. Yeah, does that answer your question?
But at the same time, in terms of engaging people, say on climate change in particular, the details, that the scientist wants, that gets in the way of people's emotional response to this. And that's where I like where the arts has stripped that away. Not, forget the details. Just how do you feel about this? The trend.
Right.
I really
yeah.
appreciate, actually, I really appreciate, that you have kind of cut that out. So
yeah, thank you.
And Marianne. Oh, Marianne, you're still on mute. Yeah.
Yes. I think I'd have learned by now. Anyway, yeah, it was fantastic. I just loved your artwork. And I was interested, I think you kind of answered the question about how did time choose you. So you sent it off in hopes that they might choose your art, and it was like a competition or something, or an idea you had?
No, I said that, or I was thinking after I got the opportunity and I was like, oh, it made me think about like just going for stuff like that and not limiting myself. I don't know how they normally choose their covers, but for that one, they reached out to me. One of their creative directors is like, I found about this, from the process is mainly in charge of like choosing the cover and each month. And, it's not always something new that's created, it depends, but he had seen my work online somewhere and he didn't remember where, like an online feature, and he kind of saved it away because I'm assuming for his job he kind of does that and keeps track. And so it's just a lucky opportunity that he'd seen my work, and I think it's helpful because I have a very like a niche, in my art, and I'm doing something very specific. And so they reached out to me and asked if I wanted to try and go for it. And in doing so, it was very clear that, they may or may not use it because it's going to depend on what they want. And they're always going to have backup plans and this and that,
And did they say last chance on the cover of Time? Because that cover that you showed us didn't say the word time. So what did the cover actually say?
It said Time, but it was kind of faded into the background. And then the headline that this was all them. The headline was One Last Chance. And I think it was to do with like the momentum from, I guess, I don't know if it was from COVID. I think it's just where we're at with kind of an environmental change. I mean, but I think they often, to be blunt, like I don't always love those type of a little bit more like alarmist headlines, but that's what a lot of places do. So I think it was like one last chance to, like, because of the momentum from COVID, I guess, and changes to fossil fuels, and I guess just where they were saying we're at where we really need to take action now, which is true, but saying one last chance is a little more dramatic.
That's okay.
Yeah,
it's a good cover. Well, I mean, it's a fantastic cover. I'm an economist, and while I was looking at the art and I was thinking of, I was wondering if how you would use this kind of art to show something in economics. And one thing would be the increasing the growth of renewable energy compared to the growth of CO2 or whatever. And anyway, your information flashed by so quickly, I couldn't get your email out your thing. So if somebody could put it in the chat, that would be useful.
I can do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was actually looking this last week at some of the reports that I looked at, the one for Maine and one for Massachusetts, that they put out like these kind of climate reports to show like this is what our plan is. Oh, like a lot of them will say like this is our plan through 2050. They have their goals and things. And so I was actually looking because I really want to make my two new pieces I'm going to make soon. I really want them to have more messages of action that people are actually taking and are planning to take, and have more messages of hope. And so that was one thing I was seeing with some of that kind of like economics, like you mentioned, where some of this had been done, some of this hasn't, but like showing, how much money and jobs we're making from renewables now, and how that growth is, showing that growth, and a lot of those kind of, really cool, exciting things. And I really enjoyed reading it. It was called, you can go to the Maine Climate Council, and it's like Maine Won't Wait is their 2021 that they came out with. And it's long, so I just kind of looked through certain pieces of it, but I really enjoyed looking at it.
Great. Ryan, you're next.
Hi, thanks so much, Jill. This is fascinating. I'm a social scientist, and so I'm particularly curious to hear about, because I think one of the big challenges that academics face is making our information and data kind of digestible to, a non-academic audience. And I'm really curious to hear about your current project with the research team that you're working about, and if there's been any kind of pushback, or what the conversation is like between you and the scientists, because I know sometimes academics get really down into the weeds about the data. And obviously you are trying to convey the data in a way that also makes an emotional impact with people to perhaps make it resonate a little bit more than, a usual slide that you might put up. And so I'd just be interested to hear a little bit more about what those conversations are like. If there's any sort of tension between you and others. Obviously you have a science background too, so you know this, but just curious to hear a little bit more about how that's going.
Yeah, it's going good. I feel like I learned a lot from this first one that I'm going to take with me. I wrote in kind of sections on 2 more grants that we'll see if they get funded this year to work with. They were writing the grant, and I'm just on the section of the grant again to get funding. But this first one, overall, it was good. It was a topic that I didn't know very much about, like, especially when you got down to like how they did the research part. And so I think one of the biggest things was just figuring out what to paint for them, and them being like, oh, well, it's up to you. It's like, okay, I need background. I need to know, what data might be good. I need like to make that kind of conversation clear going like the next time around. And I could only, focus on so many things. And one thing that actually happened as I have recently talked with them is they said, oh, I wish like you'd done a painting on this one thing. And it was like, well, I didn't know, I don't know your topic. So that needs to be clearly communicated. So that's something that I've learned a lot after is, if they don't know my process and I don't know theirs, then making those, things really clear for both of us from the beginning. But overall, it has been really great. And it's nice because they can send me all this information and all these photos and data. And it's fun for me to get to just like learn from them a bit. And they despite that comment, they are really happy with the paintings that I have made. And they will be, they'll get to own them and use them in different ways. And we're talking about how, how they might be used to reach more people than if they're just hanging in their science building kind of. So it's off to a good start, but I had a lot to learn definitely from this first time.
Other questions that folks may have, either you can come off mute or put them in the chat. Yeah,
Hi.
go ahead.
Hi, Jill. My name's Morgan. I have a question for you. So I'm also an artist, and I noticed that you just said that when you're working on the grant that they would own the artwork. And so I was just curious about that because it sounds like you're not licensing the images to them. You're actually selling the original painting to them. That's kind of unusual.
I mean, I guess it's just like a commission where you're making a painting for someone to own. And so like we'll both be doing things with the imagery, like how I choose to communicate it, online, and we're planning to show it physically in different spaces. But I guess the money that they paid me was to create the work for them to own as a research group and show at their university. But I'd be curious to hear, I guess like this is fairly new to me. I've mainly done work not kind of commission style. I've done work and then sold it, like work that I choose to do, I guess. And so, yeah, did you have what have been your experiences, I guess?
Well, typically as an artist, you want to retain ownership of the work, period, because you might have other opportunities to license it in the future. And if you sell the work outright, you no longer have the right to do anything with it, and they can make money off of it in perpetuity. So I think it's great that you're getting all these commissions. Like that's completely fabulous. But I was just concerned that you were losing your opportunity to make money off of those in the future.
Yeah, I guess I am retaining the right to, like, I still own the image itself and can make prints and sell prints and things like that, or use it online. But it's a good thing to think about and make sure that you're compensated fairly, as an artist.
Right. definitely.
Copyright or something.
Mhm.
Any other questions? I had a question, which was when you're talking about your process and you mentioned like the research time that it takes before you go in and like actually get started on, the different, the next pieces of putting together the art. How long does the actual research typically take in each of your pieces?
Oh yeah, it's a lot of work for me, depending on the topic, of course, but especially because I tend to be working on a few projects at once. I tend to do a lot of this kind of K through 12 stuff. I kind of have a lot of different pieces going on as an art, for my career, and so it can take me a while to just do that research because I'm just setting aside chunks of time and to think like the longest part of my process is definitely thinking about or figuring out how the painting is actually going to look and doing that brainstorming part of the process. And so I feel like the research will usually take me, it depends. It could just be a few hours, but it could be something that I kind of do over a few weeks as well, because I'm kind of coming back to it when I can. But it's usually, and then especially if I'm contacting someone and trying to set up a meeting to learn about their work or something, then of course that will add to it as well. So yeah, it usually takes me a while. And especially because I also am trying to learn a little bit of a light background about the topic. Yeah.
Great. Any other questions? All right. So, and we have lots of kudos for you in the chat, Jill, if you want to take a look at those before you hop off. I'm going to share my, Lorraine, Lorraine's clapping. Sorry, I thought it was a hand raise at first. I'm going to share my screen one more time just so I can tell folks about our next community conversation next week. Let me just make this bigger. So next week we'll be having Nikki Sakara of Community Water Justice. She'll be joining us Tuesday at noon. She will discuss the concerns of the recent acquisition of Nestle Waters North America in the Poland Spring brand. She'll address its implications for our groundwater in Maine, Nestle's infiltration into our state house, and the hurdles of modernizing our legal infrastructure to protect our water sources. So if you're interested in signing up for that community conversation, you can go to our website, which is sierraclub.org/Maine, and register there. All right. So thank you again so much, Jill, for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Right.
Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for joining and your questions. It was great to talk with you.
Have a great day.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Bye.